The Day of the Rope by Devon. Chapter 13. Jacob needed to relax. He'd been dealing with this nonsense with Ehrenberg's video all day, and it made him too paranoid to indulge in his own extracurricular activities. It vexed him how he'd let it become an addiction. It really was like a drug in every way. From the need to increase the dosage regularly to experience the same tranquil effects, to the withdrawal symptoms he was currently suffering from being deprived of the experience. He was no better than a junkie. The security team had swept his place several times and found nothing, which made him feel slightly more at ease, but he couldn't shake the idea that maybe he was being followed. Unlike Ehrenberg and many of the others, he didn't have the facilities required to indulge his appetite in the comfort of his penthouse. Not that he couldn't afford it, he could afford anything. Jacob just preferred using one of the many external services available to people with his particular tastes, especially those located safely outside the city. In addition to the psychological aspect of being physically removed from his home and far away from his office, it allowed him the opportunity to mingle and sometimes even engage more intimately with those who enjoyed similar activities. Everyone knew who he worked for and was always happy to grant favors, but there were just some things that genuinely brought people closer together. Unspeakable things had a way of generating a solid bond between men, a bond that was free of all the artificial smiles that his proximity to Eli granted him. But now these houses seemed less safe. If he were followed by the wrong people, they would blame him. Jacob wasn't sure why he thought he might be followed, or even who might be doing the following, but he trusted his instincts. His instincts also told him that he would need to satisfy his craving before it drove him mad. The governor had been one of the men Jacob had cultivated a bond with, and he had graciously offered a solution. The proposed arrangement involved state troopers delivering a package directly to his penthouse. People who knew anything about how state troopers were chosen knew that they could be trusted not to talk. But he still couldn't shake the fear that he was being surveilled. Jacob wouldn't risk it. He could wait a few more days. He planned to go to California to talk to Alice Green and deliver Eli's message in person. One of Eli's medium-sized Boeing jets had a secure and very private room explicitly built for in-flight distractions. The state troopers could deposit his package on the plane just before takeoff, and he could dispose of the remnants before they landed. In the meantime, he would just have to suffer. He would let this suffering build and relish its release at 30,000 feet above Pennsylvania, all the way through Arizona. Just the thought of it was giving him an erection, but he was brought back to reality with a jolt when his phone began to ring. "Yes," Jacob spoke into his phone. "Are you sure?" he said a moment later. Jacob's face grew dark, and his erection became flaccid as his heart pumped adrenaline and cortisol through his veins like acid. He almost dropped his phone as he made his way to the nearest chair. His knuckles went white as he pressed the phone hard against his head and listened intently. "Thank you," he said a few moments later, then hung up the phone and let out a deep breath. Someone, who he now very much doubted was Alice Green, was fucking with them. Green's campaign manager had been found tortured and killed at one of his unlisted properties. Not just any property, but a property that existed for a very particular reason. A property that nobody should have known about unless he had been followed there. What the hell was happening? Green had naturally blamed her campaign manager for having lost the election, but almost nobody had really taken that allegation seriously. Not even the naive public. Brad had been useful and had done the best with what he had to work with. There was no bad blood, and besides, there were rules about this sort of thing. This was, in some ways, more shocking than what had happened with Ehrenberg. For the most part, the unwashed masses had never heard the name Adam Ehrenberg, but Brad Valentini was a household name. This was going to cause problems for everyone. And torture? Jacob didn't know all the details yet, but the phrase signs of apparent torture was still ringing inside his head. He would need to clean this up before the press caught wind of it. The mainstream media followed orders, but they would likely look to Alice's people for direction on the narrative, and God only knew what she would tell them. Jacob unlocked his phone, scrolled down to Alice Green's secured line, and started a call. The line picked up automatically with a tone, and Jacob entered his code. Another tone sounded, and then a moment later he heard the voice of Green's assistant. "Please hold for Miss Green," the assistant said. A moment passed, and Alice was on the line. "Yes," she said. "Do you know who this is?" asked Jacob. "Of course. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. What is it that I can do for you?" Alice's tone was silky smooth. "What do you know about Valentini, and don't fuck with me," growled Jacob. The line was silent for a moment, and then Alice said, "Brad's in D.C. right now. What's the problem?" "Don't fuck with me, Alice," Jacob shouted into the phone, his body shaking with fury. "I'm not fucking with you. I haven't talked to Brad since yesterday. If this is about the thing with Randy, we have it under control. I appreciate your concern. I really do. But we have people on it, and..." "You do not have it under control," Jacob screamed into his phone. He rarely lost his cool, even with Alice, who could be an insufferable bitch that seemed to delight in making people lose their cool. "Brad is fucking KIA. That's how under control your people have things. But you knew that, right? Since you have everything so under control, you must know that, right?" "Thank you for the update. I was unaware of this. What can I do to help?" Alice said coldly. "You're not helping me. Let's get that cleared up right now, Alice. You're going to do what you're good at. You're going to help yourself. If you fuck this up like you've managed to fuck everything else up, then we might not need to have a chat this weekend. And believe it or not, I was looking forward to that chat, so I really hope you don't fuck this up." Jacob opened up his laptop and began forwarding his intel regarding Brad over to Alice's people. Alice, despite what most people thought of her, didn't micromanage these kinds of things. She was really good at discovering people who were good at what they did, and paying them what they were worth, and disposing of them the moment they disappointed her. Only those cold-blooded and ruthless enough to survive under these, at times highly rewarding, but also relentlessly demanding and dangerous working conditions, make up her inner circle. At their best, they were like a well-oiled deadly machine executing her demands through any means possible. At their worst, they were a platoon of paranoid sociopaths viciously focused on self-preservation. The media was terrified of Alice. They too were very focused on self-preservation. Alice would get them to say whatever they needed to say. Jacob began to calm down. This wasn't like him. Alice still needed to be put in her place, but she had been genuinely teetering on the edge of losing control, and that could be perceived as fear or panic. Worse still, it could be perceived as weakness. "I've sent over what your people need to know. Take care of this now. I want so much disinfo on this that even the alternative media can't figure out an angle. In terms of broad strokes, push gun control. Suggest this might be the work of someone inspired by white supremacists and their hate speech, that sort of thing. And Alice. Yes, she said quietly. Don't use this to push your book or whatever else you're scheming. Stick to the fucking program, Jacob said. I'm insulted that... Shut up, Alice. I'm coming to see you, he said, and then disconnected the call before Alice could respond. End of chapter 13.